For decades, Sean Connery was the definition of strength, the man who was James Bond, unbreakable, unshakable, untouchable. So when he suddenly disappeared from Hollywood, people assumed it was age, money, or simply a desire for peace. But the truth is far more painful. There was one scene, one decision made behind closed doors in an editing room that shattered something in Connery forever. It wasn't about ego. It wasn't about fame. It was about respect. What he saw that day made him quietly say, "I'm out." And from that moment on, one of cinema's greatest legends never acted again. This is why we never see Sean Connery anymore. After his marriage to Sean Connery ended, actress Diane Salento released a memoir that stunned the public and peeled back the carefully polished image of one of cinema's most admired men. Connery was celebrated for his unique mix of raw Scottish toughness and effortless elegance. But behind that screen persona were contradictions, controversies, and a life far more complex than most fans ever realized. Long before he became James Bond, he was Thomas Sean Connery, known to friends first as Tommy, then simply as Sean. Growing up in a working-class family in Edinburgh, he was called Big Tam because of his size, already towering over his peers by age 12 and fully grown to 6 feet 2 inches by 16. His father worked as a factory hand and truck driver, his mother cleaned houses, and Sean began working early himself, starting as a milkman. Work was constant, but direction was not. Connery's personal life matured just as quickly. He later revealed he lost his virginity at 14 to an older woman connected to the Auxiliary Territorial Service during World War II. Though too young to enlist at the time, he joined the Royal Navy the moment he turned 16, fully embracing military life. He got 2 tattoos, one for his family and one reading Scotland Forever, and trained as part of an anti-aircraft crew. His naval career ended abruptly 3 years later when a painful duodenal ulcer forced his discharge. Back in Edinburgh and still searching for purpose, Connery worked a string of jobs: truck driver, lifeguard, coffin polisher, and even an art school model. He devoted himself to bodybuilding and entered competitions, but unlike many rivals, he refused to give up football. That choice led to a life-altering moment at 23, when he was offered a contract with Manchester United. Despite the money and prestige, Connery turned it down, believing football had a short shelf life. Instead, he took a chance on acting. While competing in bodybuilding events, he learned auditions were being held for South Pacific. He landed a chorus role and gradually worked his way up, gaining financial independence and confidence. During that time, he fell in love with Carol Supple, but the relationship ended abruptly when her family disapproved of him, leaving Connery heartbroken. His early years were also marked by danger. One night, members of the violent Valdor gang tried to rob him in a pool hall. When 6 of them followed him home, Connery chose to confront them alone. He fought back, taking them on one by one and earning a fearsome reputation as a hard man in his neighborhood. When he wasn't literally fighting his way out of trouble, Sean Connery was studying actors and teaching himself how to become one. He took elocution lessons to soften his strong working-class accent, determined to be taken seriously. Still, the 1950s were a grind. Connery bounced between stage plays, tiny film roles, and early television appearances, even taking babysitting jobs just to pay the bills. Gradually, casting directors began to notice his raw presence. He was given tougher roles: truck drivers, boxers, men who matched his physicality and background. His real breakthrough came when he was cast opposite Lana Turner in Another Time, Another Place, but the production nearly turned violent. Turner's jealous boyfriend, gangster Johnny Stompanato, flew to London convinced the two were having an affair. He confronted Connery with a gun, a move he quickly regretted. Connery disarmed and knocked him down, after which producers had Stompanato removed from the set. Scotland Yard escorted him straight to the airport and deported him. The message was clear. Connery was not someone to intimidate. Off-screen, his rough edge didn't always charm. When he met photographer Julie Hamilton, she initially found him unbearable. Connery, however, fell hard. Over time, she did too. They moved into a small London apartment, met each other's families, and she supported him through his uncertain early career. In 1960, their lives were shaken when Hamilton was diagnosed with tuberculosis. At the same moment, Connery was offered a major role in El Cid opposite Charlton Heston, a career-defining opportunity. He turned it down to care for her, a decision that nearly cost him everything. The studio later offered him another chance, and his career survived. Friends assumed marriage was inevitable. Then, without warning, the relationship collapsed. Another abrupt turn in a life already defined by hard choices, sacrifice, and survival, just before stardom finally arrived. As Julie Hamilton later revealed, the end came abruptly. One night, lying in bed together, Sean Connery casually remarked, "What incredible eyes Diane has got." At the time, he was working on a teleplay with Diane Cilento, who was married. Hamilton instantly sensed the truth and confronted him. Connery admitted his feelings had changed. She walked out, and the relationship ended as suddenly as it had begun. Years later, fate crossed their paths again. Hamilton was now married, with a young son named Jason. In a quiet nod to the support she had given him during his struggling years, Connery promised her that if he ever had a son, he would give him the same name, a vow he would later keep. Falling for Cilento brought complications, but it also altered Connery's destiny. She introduced him to producer Harry Saltzman, who was developing a screen version of James Bond. Even then, the role was far from guaranteed. Bond's creator, Ian Fleming, clashed with producers over casting. Their first choice, Cary Grant, would only commit to one film, unacceptable for a planned franchise. A public casting search failed. Only then did Connery enter the conversation. At his audition, Connery made an unexpected choice. Instead of playing suave, he arrived in rumpled clothes and leaned into his raw, working-class edge. It worked. The producers saw something dangerous, modern, and irresistible, and cast him as Bond. Once chosen, Connery was refined, coached, and reshaped into the version of 007 the world would remember. The filmmakers wanted an introduction that would be unforgettable. That's how they created the moment when Sylvia Trench asks his name, and Connery delivers the line that would echo through cinema history: Bond, James Bond. When the first Bond film became a sensation, Sean Connery was suddenly at the center of a whirlwind. Just before the movie's release, Diane Cilento finalized her divorce from her first husband. Soon after, she became pregnant, and Connery proposed. With Bond mania exploding across the UK, the couple chose a quiet, secret wedding in Gibraltar, though even that nearly fell apart. Political tensions at the border led to Cilento being briefly detained over a passport issue, causing her to miss her ferry. For a moment, it looked like the wedding wouldn't happen at all. In the end, she made it across just in time, and they were married. Their son was born soon after, and Connery kept a promise he had once made to an ex by naming the boy Jason. Cilento stepped back from her own career to support her husband and raise their child, even accompanying him to the set of From Russia with Love, another massive success. Though Ian Fleming had initially doubted Connery, he was eventually won over and even reshaped Bond's personality to reflect Connery's dry humor before his death in 1964. Success, however, came with a cost. Connery had long feared being trapped by the Bond role, a concern Cilento had urged him to ignore, a decision she would later regret. By 1965, their marriage was under severe strain. Cilento announced she was leaving with Jason and her daughter from a previous marriage. Connery responded by moving out first. Though they crossed paths again during the filming of Thunderball, tensions were high, and arguments reportedly echoed across the set. At home, the imbalance grew worse. Connery's fame soared while Cilento's career stalled, and competition replaced partnership. Despite the turmoil, Connery used his growing influence to push beyond Bond, securing a role in Alfred Hitchcock's Marnie. Still, Bond kept pulling him back. On Thunderball, his habit of doing his own stunts nearly turned fatal when a shark slipped past a plexiglass barrier during an underwater scene, forcing him to flee the tank in seconds. By the late 1960s, the cracks were undeniable. His marriage was collapsing, and his career felt hollow. Before filming You Only Live Twice, Connery told the studio he was done with Bond. They began searching for his replacement. Connery and Salento finally separated in 1971. He dated casually afterward, but one woman stood apart: painter Micheline Roquebrune. When they met, both were still married, and the relationship stayed quiet until their divorces were finalized. The press watched closely, expecting a wedding in 1974. Connery, amused by the attention, misled reporters by claiming they had already married months earlier. A complete fiction. The real ceremony took place 2 months later, on their own terms, far from the noise he had grown tired of. After stepping away from James Bond, the producers rushed to replace Sean Connery with George Lazenby, even signing him to an ambitious 7-film contract. The plan collapsed almost immediately. Lazenby exited the role after just 1 movie, and the franchise was suddenly adrift. For Connery, who had fought hard to escape Bond, it was a surprise to many, perhaps even to himself, when he agreed to return in 1971. He came back on his own terms. Connery demanded an enormous fee and insisted the studio finance 2 passion projects of his choosing after the 7th Bond film. When they agreed, he used the money to create a trust supporting Scottish artists. Once Diamonds Are Forever was finished, he was finally free to choose his own path again. That freedom led to one of the strangest turns of his career. In 1974, Connery starred in the surreal sci-fi film Zardoz, infamous for a costume that would be mocked for decades. Director John Boorman later admitted Connery took the role partly because work had dried up after Bond. Critics dismissed the film at the time, but it eventually found cult classic status. By the 1980s, Connery's legend was secure, yet Bond still lingered. In 1983, he returned once more for Never Say Never Again. The production was chaotic. Connery pushed for rewrites, chose writers himself, and ended up handling many production duties when it became clear the producer was overwhelmed. To make matters worse, a training accident left Connery with a broken wrist. That experience sealed it. After Never Say Never Again, Connery walked away from Bond for good. This time, the title wasn't a joke. It was a promise he kept. In 1993, tabloid attention returned to Sean Connery with unsettling force. Singer-songwriter Lindsay DePaul claimed she had carried on an affair with the married actor in 1989. According to her account, Connery flirted openly and asked for her number while his wife was nearby, then ended the relationship after 5 months. DePaul later called it one of the biggest regrets of her life. Connery denied the allegations, and his wife stood by him, choosing silence. Connery continued acting through the late 1990s and early 2000s, but one project marked a breaking point. The troubled production of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was plagued by clashes, especially between Connery and director Stephen Norrington. When Norrington skipped the film's release party, Connery was asked where the director was and replied with biting sarcasm, suggesting reporters check the local asylum. Though he never formally announced retirement, Connery effectively walked away from Hollywood after the film. Sean Connery's disappearance from Hollywood wasn't a mystery. It was a decision. After filming The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in 2003, Connery quietly stepped away from acting. He didn't publicly explain his absence until 2006, when he received the American Film Institute's Lifetime Achievement Award. That night, he finally said it out loud: "I have retired for good." He added that the months leading up to it had been difficult, but reassured fans, "I'm perfectly okay and I feel well. In fact, I'm working on a history book." The timing was no coincidence. Connery had already achieved everything possible in his career, and he was also recovering from surgery to remove a tumor from his kidney. According to his representatives, he made a full recovery and was in good health. For Connery, it felt like the right moment to slow down and walk away. There was only one role that briefly tempted him back. Connery considered returning as Dr. Henry Jones for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Director Steven Spielberg personally called him, hoping to convince him. Connery later explained why he said no. It was not that generous a part worth getting back into the harness and go for. He added that the story had moved on and even joked, "I had suggested they kill him in the movie. It would have taken care of it better." More than anything, Connery enjoyed being done. As he put it bluntly, retirement is just too damn much fun. His longtime friend Michael Caine confirmed it, saying Connery had no interest in returning just to play small roles about old men, and Hollywood wasn't offering him anything else. Connery was also openly disillusioned with the film industry itself. In a 2005 interview, he didn't hold back. "I'm fed up with the idiots, the ever-widening gap between people who know how to make movies and the people who green-light the movies." Then came the punchline only Connery could deliver. "I don't say they're all idiots. I'm just saying there's a lot of them who are very good at it." None of that diminished how audiences remembered him. In 2020, fans voted Connery the greatest James Bond of all time in a Radio Times poll. With an estimated fortune of around $350 million, he had no reason to chase roles he didn't respect. In the end, Sean Connery didn't fade away. He meant it when he said he was out, and he never looked back. In 2006, the controversy deepened when Connery's first wife, Diane Cilento, published her autobiography, alleging physical and emotional abuse during their marriage. Connery denied the claims, stating he believed no abuse of women was ever justified. The situation worsened when journalists resurfaced a 1965 interview in which Connery made remarks about violence that were widely condemned decades later. On October 31, 2020, Connery's family and the producers behind the James Bond films announced that he had died peacefully in his sleep at age 90. Closing the chapter on a towering career marked by brilliance, controversy, and a complicated legacy.